from now. I think and also Emmanuel will be doing the recordings for us so that anytime we can go back to it. So once we come, Emmanuel will start with the recording and then we can proceed with our classes. But I'll make sure everything
That's a
is in
good
place.
idea. Yeah, that's a good idea
Yeah,
to do that. Okay.
yeah. Thank you. So I think we can carry on with today's agenda.
Okay. Let me share my screen here real quick. Get a drink of water here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, welcome everyone. Welcome to our second session on telecom signaling fundamentals. And like Raphael said, we finished off on this slide. We're just starting to begin. We're just beginning, I should say, to just look at some of the basics of wireless and mobile telephony, again, kind of at a high level. And we ended up here last week talking about just some of the people that were involved years ago uh, um, with radio. That would have been James Maxwell or James Clerk Maxwell, and then Heinrich Hertz, Marconi, and then the person that developed frequency modulation was Armstrong. Now, when you look at, again, we're not going to go into great detail here, but just to look at the electromagnetic spectrum, it's made up of these different bands. And what we're going to be interested in here is the radio band, the very first band, which is subdivided up into these particular frequencies. And in general, the frequencies that really are good for mobile telecommunications. What I mean by good is that you don't need line of sight. There's enough power to go through windows, go through walls, so you don't have see cell towers everywhere. It has good characteristics, good properties. Is in this band, ultra high frequency. Now that occurs between 300 and 3,000 megahertz or millions of hertz, which is the cycles per second. So a lot of things go on there. Most mobile telecommunications, what was started off as cellular, was roughly in the 800 megahertz range. Some in the 700, some a little bit higher, but roughly 800 megahertz. This is part of what's known as the UHF band. Years ago, there were TV stations that were in that upper band, that UHF band. Some of the mobile telecommunications is in the higher, a little higher frequency here. Um, that would be like the 17, 18, 1900 megahertz, which is getting very close to what's known as the microwave radio frequencies. And so this is a good area of frequency, and this is where most cellular communications takes place. There is some allocated for fifth generation for 5G that would also include this extra high frequency. But some of the characteristics of the radio is the higher the frequency goes, the more it takes on the characteristics of light. So it becomes more of a beam. It doesn't and it doesn't stay going far. It doesn't have good what's known as attenuation. So this becomes a very ideal frequency range. So that's where most of the cellular takes place. So radio does have some basic characteristics, and some of those characteristics are it reflects, and that's a good thing. It reflects the on that reflection. That way, you wouldn't have cell towers everywhere. If it did not reflect, you would need line of sight for everything. We don't You don't need that. And in that ultra high frequency radio band, the waves can go around. They can bend around.
Hello, Steve. A
Yes,
little question.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So with the previous image, I wanted to know if this form of electromagnetic radiation it can be dangerous to human health, or which form of the radiation can be dangerous to human health.
I didn't quite understand that, Raphael. What was the question? So is this frequency band right
Ye-
here?
yes, for the previous image with a different frequency band. which
Yes, right
which of
here.
the wavelengths, yes, which of the wavelengths can be harmful to human health?
Well, that's a good question because there's always been controversy on whether electromagnetic radiation is harmful. There's always been that controversy. But where there's the kind of the big controversy right now is this millimeter wavelength. The higher the, in general, the higher the frequency, the more it can harm you. So it's looked at as if you have a lot of this
Health hazards.
frequency here, that there could be harm. Now, there was also a long time where it was thought that even frequencies here could be harmful to you, but that's thus far has not been proven that these radio frequencies are harmful to you. But we're always being bombarded with these radio frequencies. But the ones that are up in this, there is some health concerns here in this extra high frequency. But one of the things about that, the higher the frequency, the faster you can get data. So you can download videos very quickly at this frequency. Now the bad thing is you need more cell towers. You need, because again takes on more of the characteristics of light. But when you read about the millimeter wavelength, and that's something that's unique to 5G. Now, 5G doesn't only operate here. 5G, which is the fifth generation, also operates in the existing UHF frequencies. But some of the 5G has been allocated here, where it's, again, this is kind of for use today in things like weapons control and radio astronomy. So, yeah, there's always a concern. There's always a health concern here. That's a good point, Raphael. It's a good point. Is that okay? Good, good. Now,
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
some of the
Well answered.
properties, there's the reflection and then refraction. Refraction is the bending of the radio waves as it goes through. I mean, that's most visible with a straw and thing. The attenuation, that's kind of the strength of it as it goes through a medium. So it might start off as a strong signal, but it dies down quickly. And the higher the frequency, the quicker it dies down. Lower frequencies tend to stay going further. They can also follow the curvature of the Earth, whereas higher frequencies now take on more of the characteristics of light. And when you measure these radio frequencies, it's always measured in what's known as a wavelength. And the wavelength is the velocity of light, which is 300 million meters per second, divided by the frequency. So if the frequency here is roughly, let's say, 900 megahertz, oops, wrong way, 900 megahertz, you'd have 900,000 hertz here divided into three would be 3/9, basically 1/3 of a meter. So the wavelength at 900 megahertz is roughly a third of a meter, or something like about that much. So that's the actual wavelength. Now it's going out very quickly, but again, that's the velocity, that's the wavelength. So the frequency then is the number of crests that pass any one point in 1 second. Again, just nothing that you're not going to be required to understand. Let's take a look at some of the early mobile telephony. Early mobile telephony. Now, the whole concept of mobile telephony, of being able to go somewhere, the mobile, most of those early ones were in cars and automobiles. Um, but the whole concept has been around since the late 1940s, and even in some cases earlier than that, where there's actual mobile telephony. Some of the earlier systems, though, they would place an antenna at a high geographic point, and then they would have several channels. Now it takes a channel, it takes frequency, it takes some length of frequency, some number of frequency for you to talk. So that might be 10 kilohertz, that might be 30 kilohertz, but it takes a number of these frequency in a certain range, the number of these frequency cycles for you to talk. And if you're going to talk duplex, it takes two of them, me to talk to you and you to talk to me. So the mobile telephonies or the early mobile telephone systems, they would have just a finite number of channels, let's say 10 channels. Maybe they had 20 channels. 20 channels means 10 people can talk duplex, can talk to each other. But what happens to the 11th person? There's nothing they can do. You're blocked. So it was basically just a two-way radio. There was only a few channels with an antenna strategically placed. So you can imagine today a large metropolitan city with only 10 available channels. Well, I mean that that might have worked back in the 1930s, 1940s. It wouldn't work today. And once all these channels were occupied, that was it. You couldn't get in. You were blocked. And if you wanted to call someone, you needed operator assistance. You might have seen some old movies or old TV shows where people had a mobile phone and they had to call an operator. This is KLV, whatever, some number, and then that operator would connect them to the wireline network. There was no automatic connection. So basically, early mobile telephony was a frequency modulated two-way radio. So how do you increase capacity? You got more people that want to use this system. Well, there's really three ways you can increase your capacity. Number one, increase your bandwidth. Go to your government agency and ask for more of this. Ask for more frequency here. Not likely. This frequency in this range, especially in this range, is not just sitting there idle with no one using it. These things are used for two-way radios, for pipelines, there's a lot that happens at that frequency range. So the likelihood of just going ahead and getting more frequency is unlikely. But that's one way you can increase your capacity, more frequency. Another way you can do it is to improve your modulation. Somehow the way the signal goes over the air, make it more efficient. That's one way to do it. So that's the second way you can increase capacity. The third way you can increase capacity is to reuse the frequency you have at some distance away. In other words, don't power out so much, reduce the amount of power and reuse that frequency, that same frequency at some distance away, as long as the two don't interfere. And that's the idea of cellular. You radiate less power and you reuse frequency at a distance away. Now that you don't reuse it at the very next cell, you might reuse it at some distance away, but you can continue to reduce the power on that frequency. The power of the mobile is pretty low. I mean, a mobile telephone today is maybe 6/10 of a watt. I mean, it's very, very low power. The chances when you're talking on your mobile phone, you're not going to bleed over into someone else's frequency, you know, 10 kilometers away because there's no power there. However, on the cell side, on the actual cell, the tower, if you reduce that power, you can reuse that same frequency over here. And that's the whole idea of cellular. Follow hex, try to convey to show interlocking cells. Some kind of central device that can keep track of these, of who is assigned to what channel. Now, theoretically, then you could continue to have less and less and less power, which means you're shrinking your cell down more and more people because you can reuse that frequency at some distance away. But there's a practical limit. If you were in an area, if the cell was in an area where, let's say, it's a congested area and mostly people are walking, like in a crowded urban area, then you can have small cells. But if you're next to a major motorway where cars are going by at 60, 70, 80 kilometers, well, you can't have a real small cell because the system could not reassign channels that quick. So there is a trade-off there. But the whole idea of cellular, the real capacity breakthrough was cellular communication. And cellular early on, now it's changed today. A lot of this has changed today. But early on, the most ideal reuse pattern was this 7-cell reuse pattern. So look at these cells here. Roughly 6 and 7. Now you can visualize you put a cell tower at the center of each one of these cells, but that's not how it's done. You have one cell and you put that cell on sectorize it. So 120 degrees goes applies to that cell, 120 degrees to that cell, and 120 degrees there. So you've probably seen these cells that have these looks like these they're facing in different directions. They're sectorized channels. And let's just pick out a number. Let's say you have 330 kilohertz channels, 300 of these channels, and let's say 30 kilohertz wide. You need that for voice to understand voice. So you have 330 kilohertz channels. You could put 1/3, 1/6 of, no, 1/7 of them here, 1/7 of them here, 1/7, 1/7, 1/7, 1/7. If you were to equally distribute them, now you don't have to equally distribute them, but if you were, you could take 1/7 of that. So roughly 40 some channels in this cell, 40 some in here, 40 and so on. That's roughly what you would have, because some of those channels are needed for control. Some of those are for voice, but some of those are control. So and then whatever cells are assigned here, you can duplicate them in this cell number 6, because you have another 7-cell reuse pattern up here and another 7-cell reuse pattern here. And theoretically you can continue to reduce the power in these cells and reuse that frequency. So that's the whole idea of cellular. The whole idea of cellular is to divide up an area, a geographic area, into these cells and reuse frequency. Just a little history down here in the lower left-hand corner. The first mobile phone call was placed on April 3rd, 1973. This was in New York. There were 2 engineers. One worked for Bell Telephone Labs and one worked for Motorola. And Motorola won. And on that day, on April 3rd of 1973, he called his counterpart at Bell Labs and says, I'm now on the sidewalks in New York, and I'm talking to you on a completely mobile phone." But you can see these were quite expensive, and they're certainly nothing like we have today. So this is the idea of cellular. Now, when you look at cells, there's some concepts. We look at the cells themselves. We look at the frequency reuse pattern, and the 7-cell, at least initially. Today it's different, but at least initially, the 7-cell reuse pattern was very common. And then handovers. What happens when you're assigned a radio channel and you now drive and you go into another cell and you go into another cell and another cell? Because that's the whole idea of mobile communications. You can drive around and the system will assign you new radio channels. And in the early systems, there was definitely a break before make. So there was definitely a time period where you were out of communication. It was roughly 200 milliseconds. So for 1/5 of a second, you were out of communication with the person you were talking to. Now, humans would not recognize that, but there was a break before make on these early systems. So when you look at the concept, these cells, some of these can be quite large. You have a wide geographic area. And what determines the size of the cell? How much power you reduce out, or how much power you actually emit. So conceptually, think of this like this. Conceptually, think of a cell tower in the middle of each one of these cells. In practicality, you have one cell tower that is sectored 120 degrees here. That way you reduce the number of actual cells. Questions? Okay. Now there are some cells that are called microcells. They cover areas less than 1.5 kilometers in diameter. And this would be more for suburban type of areas, maybe some areas in a city. There are also smaller cells called pico or pico cells, and this would be for areas mostly people walking. And then you can have real small cells. This would be for maybe inside of a shopping center or maybe inside of a sporting arena or something like that where people are walking. So you can control you can more know when they are outside of any kind of a range. So there's just these are just different types of cells that are out there. But again, the concept is the same. The concept is the same that you're going to emit a certain amount of power, and that's going to control the size of that cell. So how often can you reuse the frequency? Well, if you kind of break it down, if you look at the radius, which is the radius of that cell determined by the power, and your reuse number, and again, early on now, the most common reuse pattern was seven cell reuse. So these 7 cells are duplicated up here. And whatever frequencies you have in this cell, you can safely reuse them here without interference. And so you look at that 7 cell reuse pattern, that's the N part. And then what is that distance? What is the distance from here? And as it turns out to be, D is the square root of 3NR, which is approximately 4.6 times the radius. So whatever that radius is, you multiply it by 4.6. That's the frequency. That's when you can reuse that frequency over. Now, I do want to say that these were early on systems. Today, they have other modulation technologies that allow more multiple users. You don't use that same reuse pattern. But again, this was initially when we're talking about when things first started off with cellular. And this is just to give you an idea of the whole concept of cellular. Another concept is handing over. So a handover occurs when you're assigned a radio channel on one cell, and now you move into another cell. Well, the radio frequency here is assigned by another radio tower. So the channel you're going to use is another radio tower. So but in order for this to occur, you have to be engaged in a call. If your mobile phone is idle, and it's in your pocket or it's on the seat next to you in the car, and you're not talking on the phone, you're not assigned a radio channel. So when you're known here in another cell, the system might say, "Hey, here's a user in that cell. Do you know who this is?" And he says, "Yeah, I know who that is. I'll just make sure I know what cell he's in now." But there's no voice channel assigned. However, when someone calls you or you call someone, and here the example here is to the wireline network. Now the wireline network has its own acronym called the PSTN, the Public Switched Telephone Network. That's just a common term for the wireline network.
Hello, Steve.
Yep, please.
Can I please chip in with a question?
Sure.
Yes. So what happens when there is a failover?
When there's a what?
Failover. You mentioned about handing over. So what if it,
Hmm.
it gets failed? This handing over gets failed.
Yes, what the handover is implying is that you have to be handed over to a different frequency
Okay.
because if you're talking to someone on the phone, this someone here called you or you called them, so that's you're talking to someone on the phone. That means that
Yeah.
this mobile switch, has assigned you a radio channel here, but that radio channel is only good in that cell. So once you arrive at the border here, the system would recognize that your signal is getting weak, but it doesn't control what's here. So the switch has a list called its neighbor list. So it knows what cells are neighbor. So it asks its neighbor, "Hey, can you take a measurement for me on that channel?" And it says, "Okay, take a measurement." It says, "Oh yeah, this is the best measurement. This is a good one." Because the mobile switch might ask this cell here and this cell here, "Hey, give me some measurements." And the one with the best measurement is this particular cell right here. So then the switch would command, okay, command the mobile to retune to that frequency. So at that point, the mobile switch would come over here and on that channel say, I want you to retune to this new frequency here. And as soon as it does, right here, it's now on this frequency. So that's what's known as a handover. You're handing over from
Okay.
one radio channel to another radio channel. Okay?
Okay.
And that's
Well
called
understood. But
intra-system.
it,
Mhm.
can can there be a case where this one will fail, like the handing over will fail, and what happens if it does? It does fail.
Is there a scenario where the handover does what, Raphael?
Like if there is a failure in the handover.
Oh, some kind of failure, then the call would
Yes.
drop.
Yes.
The call would drop. If there, let's say, if there were
Okay.
no radio channels here, if there were no radio channels here, let's say this was all air, all this was occupied with people, because eventually this mobile phone would hang on as long as it could into here. But if you keep going further and further and further away, the radio signal here is getting weaker and weaker, and the radio signal here is getting real weak. So you lose communication. So if there was any kind of failure, you would just drop off.
Okay. I guess that explains why sometimes um, the call just
Sometimes
drops
you'll
without
go into
anyone
dead
hanging
zones.
up.
Yep, you'll go into they have those today. They have dead zones where all of a sudden you're talking and hey, who am I talking to? And there's no one there. And all of then you call back, hey, I lost you. That happens all the time because there's dead zones. It's not necessarily you run out of radio channels. It's just some type of dead zone. But this is what's known as an intra-system handover. So you're staying within your same system, your same mobile switch. You're staying within that same mobile switch because that cell tower and that cell tower are both under control of this switch. Let's say you live 30, 40 kilometers away and you're driving home and now you're on a highway and you're talking on the phone and you get handed over, but it's to a separate switch. It's to a separate mobile switching center. So now this switching center can't control that. Well, that's what happens here. If you're talking on the phone to someone in a public switch network, and that could be another wireless, I just use the wire line as an example. And you're talking on the phone, and you're moving through here like this, and you move from cell to cell to cell, and you're under control of that switch. Well, let's say you get to the edge here. This is the last cell controlled by that switching center. The next cell here is controlled by a whole nother mobile switching center. Well, now this network here can't assign a radio channel here. It's because it does not control the radio frequencies here. It's here. So what happens now is this switch will send a signaling message over here and say, I have a subscriber on this frequency. Take a measurement for me, please. So this thing takes a measurement so it can measure this. And let's say the subscriber is right there at the edge. It takes a measurement and reports back, says, okay, here's the measurement you asked me to do. And this switch says, okay, I need a radio channel because that they're heading in your direction. So this thing will now assign the radio channel here, and it'll tell this switch, okay, here's the new frequency I want you to tell the mobile to go to. So then it tells the mobile through the cell tower, I want you to retune to this new frequency. And as soon as you do that, you're now under control of this switch. But the voice path now goes on a voice circuit here. The signaling is on one path, the actual voice circuit is on the other path. So again, you don't know the difference. So now your voice actually goes from someone here, it goes through a voice path set up to that switch, through a voice path set up to that switch, through the radio right here. That's called inter-system handover because now you're handing over to another network. to another mobile switch. So that's called inter-system handover or handoff. So what's happening here is the call is in progress. The mobile is moving toward a cell that's controlled by a different switch. So the serving switch, this one right here, the serving switch asks its neighbor right here to take a measurement on that voice channel. And then once it accepts that, switch bands the mobile, hey, retune to that frequency. And it does. And now you're over here and the call progresses. Now, in order for intra-system handover to occur and inter-system handover to occur, you have to be using your phone. If you're not using your phone, it doesn't do this. If your phone is idle and you come into a new system, this will cause what's known as an update location. It will update your location here and cancel your location here. We'll go through that procedure. But handovers are only if you're engaged in a call or using your mobile phone. So those are the four basic concepts. The whole idea of cellular, which has been around for a long time, they still use that term today, cellular phones. The whole idea of cellular is to reuse existing channels at some distance away. That distance is roughly 4.3 times the radius. There's handovers. If you're talking on the phone and you get handed over from one cell, radio frequencies controlled from one cell to another cell, or if you go into an entirely different system, that would be inter-system handover. So those are the concepts, and we will leave it at that right here. So next week we will start right here, and the way I'm going to know how we do that is this.
Yes. Okay.
I'm going to put this on here. You always have to make
Yeah,
sure I
Steve.
do this. Yeah, please. Any questions?
Yeah. Before that, like this thing occurs to me. Most of the times we'll be seeing telecom towers disguised as palm trees. Why is it
Mm-hmm.
necessary for that? Uh, why are some of telecom towers disguised as palm trees in some
Oh,
areas?
yeah. Why? Sometimes you'll see them disguised as pine trees or palm trees or something like that. That's a good point. They're trying because a lot of times local communities don't want the sight of a cell tower. They don't like it. They think a cell tower looks bad. So it's and so what they'll do is they'll try to disguise the tower as something that looks like it belongs in the neighborhood. It'll be a tree or some type of tree that's maybe native to that area, or maybe some kind of palm tree or something like that. So when people just kind of glance at the landscape, they don't see this big tower. So that was kind of an attempt to do that. Now it probably doesn't fool too many people, but anyway, that's the attempt at it. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Anything else?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, you dropped
Yeah,
off just for a
yeah.
second
Now,
there.
with the last one, you mentioned about 5G, and it occurred to me,
Yes.
how do you think the future of telecom systems is going to be, like 6G and beyond? How is it going to be?
Probably very AI generated. We'll talk more about this when we look at the G's, but the 5G has been a very slow rollout. Some companies have 5G radio, some companies have 5G in the network side, some are keeping 4G network, but 5G radio. There's a much more of a mixing and matching in 5G. The fifth generation has been around for a long time. It just has a very slow rollout. There's already talk of a sixth generation, which is probably going to include satellites. So I don't know. I've not seen anything on 6G yet. Um, and again, we'll talk more about this when we look at generations. But when you look at generations, the fourth generation had a very quick rollout. In other words, companies very quickly put in what's known as LTE. It's the fourth generation. And there's a reason for that, mainly because of the explosion of data. Your mobile phones, especially with the introduction of the iPhone, data was just all over the place. I mean, people were using their phones more and more and more for data. And 3G could not handle it. 3G, the architecture of third generation, could not handle that. So they went to 4G very quickly. But now you come up with 5G, and yeah, things are a little bit faster. You can do more with it, but it's not all that. I mean, it can do a lot. It can do more things. It has a lot more use cases. But in the end, a lot of companies are saying, well, 4G is handling things just fine. So why invest the money in 5G until we actually have to? So 5G has had a very slow rollout. It's working. It's coming. It's not like it's not ever going to be there, but it's one of those things that's rather slow. We'll examine some of those reasons also. We'll examine some of those reasons why 5G has just been such a slow rollout.
So is 5G a bit of disappointment?
To a lot of groups, yes, because it has all these use cases. And we'll mention this again, but there's really only I mean, at the end of the day, a company is not going to put in something because of technology. They're going to update something or improve something or invest money in something for the primary reason of making money. Now, they might do it for better security. They might do it because the government mandates something. They might do it because there's manufacturers discontinues hardware. But really, return on investment is the reason why they're going to invest money, unless they're forced to do it for some other reason. Unless they're forced to do it. If the government says, well, that technology doesn't have the security that we require, we're going to make you do this, then they'll do it. But given all that, if 4G is handling everything and they're making money at 4G, and they all they can't make any additional money at 5G, there's no incentive to put in 5G. Now, eventually they will. Eventually, the architecture of 5G will probably dictate the cost. It's cheaper to run. But if for a technology that's been out since 2018, and now it's 2026, it's not where I think most people thought it would be.
Okay,
And
well said.
we'll examine
Someone,
those reasons. We'll examine some when we look at the different architectures.
okay, okay, very well. Samuel, do you have any question? I see
Anyone
you've
else?
raised your hands. Samuel, hello, Samuel. Is Samuel with us?
Yeah, hello.
Yes, Samuel.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Any
Kindly go
So,
on.
questions?
please, I want to ask. So, with regards to the reflection theory, I want to know when a radio wave hits an object and bounces back to the direction to the house. So, in case my house is closer to the cell tower, I want to know if the signal strength can affect the voice communication or transmission of it.
Raphael, can you? There's something I heard part of it. There's a radio next to his house. Is that what you're saying? Or
Can you please repeat it one more time?
So, with regards to the reflection theory, I want to
Mhm.
know maybe if my house is closer to the cell tower and maybe there is a voice or transmission of data, can the signal can the signal strength be affected?
um, Generally not. The way the modulation now, early on in the early days when it was all an analog signal, that would have meant something. Today the signals that are used on the radio are digital signals. So no, that shouldn't. It shouldn't interfere at all. So it's just the modulation is much more sophisticated today than it was back in the early generations. So that you should be okay there, if I understand the question.
I hope someone that was clear.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Very
Anyone
well.
else?
Anyone who wants to chip in? Okay. If not, it has been a very great session with you guys. It's already past 3:30, so
We will
we can
we'll
zoom off
see
here.
you next week at the same time. Have a good weekend. Have a good rest of the class this evening. And any questions, just call Raphael and he'll convey them to me. And otherwise, we'll see you next week at this time. Okay. And
Bye,
it's
guys.
1 o'clock in the afternoon for me, or 1:30. So maybe it's time for a little lunch. So you guys have a good evening.
Yeah.
Have a good weekend.
Good. Bye.
We'll see you. Yep.